My name's Remington Griswold, PharmD candidate from Purdue University, and then today we're going to go over some carb counting information. So, first thing is, you might be thinking, well, why is carb counting important? Well, 100% of carbohydrates are converted directly into sugar within 1 to 2 hours. So you can basically think carbohydrates equal sugar. And then this sugar causes your blood glucose levels to elevate, which in turn raises your insulin level to help use this sugar and take it into cells. You might be thinking, oh, well, maybe I don't have diabetes. Why is this important? Well, insulin and glucose levels aren't just important for people with diabetes. They're important for everyone because one of insulin's main functions is to store fat. So higher insulin levels equals more fat storage, and it makes it harder to lose weight. So being mindful of your carb intake can not only help control your diabetes, but can also help you lose some weight in the process. So let's go ahead and talk about a carb serving. 15 grams of carbs equal 1 serving. You might be thinking, well, why would I want to do another step of math to get to this? Well, it's more sustainable to use carb servings long-term compared to counting grams of carbs. And let me give you an example why. So let's say you had 17 grams of carbs for breakfast, 35 grams of carbs for lunch, and then 45 grams of carbs for dinner. If you had to remember that, I bet you probably can't even remember what I said you had for breakfast already. But it's a lot easier to just remember, oh, I had 1 carb serving for lunch or for breakfast, 2 carb servings for lunch, and then 3 for dinner. It's a whole lot easier to remember those smaller numbers than the big specific numbers like 17, 32, and then 50. And another good thing is many common foods have carbs easily divided by 15. So next, let's go over how many carbs you should be eating every day to help maintain your current weight or help get you to a goal weight that you want. So let's start off with, you pick a goal weight for you, or you pick your current weight that you want to maintain. Let's pick a nice round, easy number to start with and say your goal weight's 200 pounds. You're going to multiply that by 10 just because it's been shown that you need around 10 calories per pound to help maintain that weight. So that equals 2,000 calories a day. And then you move that 2,000 down here, and then you're going to divide it by 2 because you want around 50% of your daily calories to be from carbohydrates. And then you want 30% to be from fat and 20% to be from protein, but that's something we can go over at another time. So we divide 2,000 by 2 and we get 1,000 calories from carbohydrates every day. We move this 1,000 calories down, and we're going to divide 1,000 calories by 4 because every gram of carbohydrates has 4 calories of energy in it. So that makes it a nice, easy 250 grams of carbs per day. You move this 250 down, and you get 250 grams of carbs per day. And remember, we said 15 grams of carbs equals 1 carb serving. So you divide this 250 by 15, and you get 16.7 carb servings per day. So that is what you would like to see if you weigh 200 pounds or your goal weight is 200 pounds. But that's a whole lot of math. So let's go ahead and crumple that up, and I'll show you the easy way to do it. The easy way to do it is just multiply your current weight that you want to maintain or the goal weight that you want to get to by 0.083. And this will give you 16.6. And that's a whole lot easier than all the math I showed you on the previous slide, and you basically get the same number. Instead of 16.7 carbs by doing all that math, just this one little equation will give you 16.6. But the thing is, you always want to round your answer down. So you would want to have 16 carb servings per day because this number is the maximum amount of carbs that servings you want to eat every day in order to maintain your current weight or help get you down to your goal weight. Now, let's go ahead and practice how to do some carb servings. So here's a nutrition label for you. And the first step is to look at the serving size on the label. That is located right in that top green circle, and it shows that your serving size is 1/2 cup. The next step is to look at the number of carbohydrates per serving, and that's with the lower green circle, and it says your total carbohydrates equals 21 grams. So how many carbohydrate servings are in one half a cup serving of this food item? Well, the thing you got to remember is one carb serving equals 15 grams of carbs. So we're going to divide this 21 by 15 to give us 1.4 carbohydrate servings for this one half a cup of food. So we can round that down to about one carb serving per food serving. So let's go ahead and clean off that nutrition label a little bit and get rid of those circles. Now let me ask you, how many carb servings are in the entire box? Well, the first step to do this is to look at the servings per container, and you see in that green circle that it's 4 servings per container. You might think, well, heck, this is pretty easy now. I know there's 1 carb serving per half a cup serving of food, and there's 4 servings per container. So this is an easy one. There's 4 carb servings in the whole box. Well, we got to slow down a little bit, and we got to actually make sure we do the math. So we got to multiply our 21 grams per serving by the 4 servings in the box, and we get 84 grams of carbohydrates total for the entire box. Then we're going to divide this 84 grams by 15, and we get 5.6 servings. And we can round this to about 6 carbohydrate servings for the entire box. And you might think, well, heck, I thought it was going to be 4, but the only thing is you got to be careful with rounding issues and make sure that you do the math each time to make sure you get an accurate number. So now that we've practiced, let's go ahead and go over where most of the carbs you're eating are going to come from. So let's look at fruit. Fruits are pretty healthy. You might be thinking, well, heck, if carbs are bad, there shouldn't be in any fruit. Well, if you remember from the first slide, I said carbohydrates equal sugar. And the same is in the reverse. Sugars equal carbohydrates. And there's a ton of natural sugars inside of fruit. And that's where all the carbs come from fruit. It's all the natural sugars that make the fruit sweet. And these are some pretty good carbs just because they have a whole lot of other nutrients located within inside the fruit itself. So let's go on to vegetables. Vegetables are slightly different than fruit because you got to separate vegetables into 2 different classes. There's starchy vegetables, which are corn, green peas, potatoes, sweet potatoes, and then squash. And these all have a decent amount of carbs in them. A half a cup of corn or green peas or mashed potatoes all are 1 carb serving of food or 1 carbohydrate serving. Then if you look at the sweet potato, a half a cup of sweet potato is 1 carb serving as well. So let's go ahead and move on to the non-starchy vegetables, which are asparagus, onions, broccoli, cauliflower, spinach, and more. These foods are so low in carbs, it's pretty negligible, and you don't really even have to worry about counting carbs with these types of vegetables. So the next one is where most of our carbs will come from, the grains, your rice, your bread, your pasta, because a lot of these are made with wheat, and they have to add some amount of sugar to help make these bread products because you don't want it to taste exactly like wheat. So there's a lot of little bits of sugar in there to make the bread taste pretty good. And it ends up being a whole lot of carbs in these grain products. So next are 2 types of food that don't really have a whole lot of carbs, which are dairy and meat. If you look over on the dairy picture, there's milk, cottage cheese, butter, yogurt, and cheese. The thing is, naturally, these things don't have a whole lot of carbs in it, but when you start sweetening your yogurt with different flavors or sweetening ice cream, you add a whole lot of sugars to it, and that's where the carbohydrates come from in the dairy products. And the same thing with meat. If you look at steak, fish, chicken, any of those, there's not any carbs in it naturally, but when you put the breading around it or how you prepare it with butter or something, or margarine or some, for example, that's where you get the carbs from your meat. If you just take your meat, bake it in the oven, it'll have no carbs. So now let's go over some just good rules of thumb for carb counting. 1 piece of bread or half a bun equals 1 serving of carbs. And I don't know about you, but whenever I have a sandwich, I always have 2 pieces of bread and a top and a half of a hamburger bun. So anytime you eat a sandwich in general, it's probably going to be about 2 servings of carbs. Next, let's talk about some fruits. If you look at a fruit and it's the size of a baseball, on average, you can say it's 1 serving of carbs. So if you have an apple and it's the size of a baseball, 1 serving. But if you go to the store and you see this gigantic apple that you've never seen before and it's the size of a softball, just think of it as 2 servings of fruit or 2 servings of carbs. And the same thing with oranges. If it's smaller than the size of a baseball, 1 serving. If it's bigger than the size of a softball, 2 carb servings. And then for bananas, a whole banana is 2 carb servings as well. So something else is you want to be careful and cautious with sauces and condiments because many of them contain hidden sugars. Just something you might not think about. The most common condiment that I usually see is Heinz ketchup. And 1 tablespoon, which is the size of the top of your finger, the tip of your middle finger is on average about 1 tablespoon. That contains 5 grams of carbs. So if you use 3 fingertip amounts of ketchup, you get a whole carb serving just from your ketchup that you ate. So you got to be careful with sauces and condiments. Next, if a food is under 5 grams of carbs, you can basically count it as 0 servings, but don't go overboard and eat a ton of it. Because everything in moderation, if you eat too much of anything, it won't be good for you. So we also want to be careful with rounding. As we saw before on the figuring out how many carb servings are in the entire box, we got to be careful with that. And lastly, I know this can be somewhat overwhelming. So my advice would be to start small and just carb count 1 day a week and increase from there. And before you know it, it'll be a whole habit and it'll be easy for you. Once again, thank you for listening. What questions do you have?